Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Happy Monday. Welcome to the P.A.S. Report. And it's not really a happy Monday. And the reason it's not a happy Monday is because there's something seriously wrong in this country, especially when you see an ex-Marine, Daniel Perry. He had to surrender to the authorities in New York City, all because District Attorney Alvin Bragg wants to continue to make a mockery of the criminal justice system by charging Penny with second-degree manslaughter in the death of Jordan Neely. Now, Penny restrained Neely because Neely was threatening and harassing subway goers in New York City. As a result of the restraint, Neely died. And now they want to pin it on Penny. Understand that Neely had a long history with 42 or 43 arrests, and there was an open warrant on Neely for assaulting a 67-year-old woman, not for nothing. But the ones who should be arrested, the ones who should be charged, or at the very least removed from office, are the city officials themselves. Why is it okay for ordinary people minding their own damn business to be harassed and threatened on subways, on the city streets? If officials did their jobs, this incident wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't be seeing these incidents take place. They are the ones that should be held accountable for Neely's death. And think about the message this sends. Why would anyone in their right mind ever get involved in an incident when they have to worry that if something happens, they're going to be criminally prosecuted, not the actual victimizer? It really is a shame. We have Good Samaritan laws on the books for a reason. We should encourage people to get involved. But now, who would take the risk? And I swear, we are descending into Gotham City. We really are. I will keep you updated on this case because I think it goes to the core of the cultural rot that I was explaining in last week's episode. In any event, make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode and visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. Sign up for the newsletter over there. Getting to today's guest, he's a friend of the show. He's been on multiple times. Today, the editor-in-chief of Just the News and co-host of Just the News, Not Noise, on Real America's Voice, none other than John Solomon is joining me. He is someone that still adheres to the principles of journalism, the search for truth. Even more, John is the author of a brand new children's book, Hidden Headlines, a Seymour Clues mystery, part of the Brave Book series. John, welcome. Tell everyone about the book.
I got to tell you, you know this, I don't think I ever would have thought on my resume I'd ever have a line that said children's author. But it's really, this book is born in two really extraordinary experiences. One is a funny, classic John Solomon personal moment. A couple of years ago, my son, who's autistic, got a pet hamster. And they really bonded well. But my wife and him had to go away for a family trip, and I was left with one mission: feed the hamster, don't lose the hamster.
Don't tell me you ended up losing it or killing it.
Well, I fed the hamster one night, and I must have left the door open just a little too long, and all of a sudden he was gone, and I couldn't find him. And I was mortified. It's like 10 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night. So I can't find him anywhere. So I'm so desperate to not have to face the wrath of my wife and son that I go to CVS and I get a stethoscope, and I start listening on the floorboards for scratching. And I finally found him. Like 3 hours later, I found him in a air conditioning vent, one of the HVAC vents. So I scoop him up, throw him into my back in the cage, and I think I've dodged a bullet. And word got around my office that I had done this, that people thought it was funny. And on national television, my co-host, Amanda Head, who you know very well, outed me to the world that I had lost Chunk the hamster, and now my wife knew. And so I always said, hey, if we get him, and then he started trending on Chunk, the hamster started trending on social media. So we decided that there would, if we ever had an opportunity to take that brief notoriety, 15 minutes of fame of Chunk, we try to use it for some good. And then as I was doing all the reporting on Hunter Biden, then the Biden laptop, and then the China origins or the Wuhan labs, potential ties to the origins of COVID-19. And I saw myself get canceled and censored, but many others. And there was no outrage. And I was apoplectic. I couldn't understand, how could this country not be upset about government sanctioned censorship? And then I found out that there was one or two generations of young adults who had gone through the education system, and they weren't taught the civics lessons that you and I were taught. They weren't taught about the Bill of Rights. They weren't taught why the First Amendment was first, why free speech was essential to the constitutional republic. And then I realized, in fact, one or two of the young adults that I consulted in this journey of frustration told me that they actually were taught by some of their educators that in some circumstances, government-backed censorship could actually be good for the greater collective. Now, I have no idea what the greater collective is.
That's horrifying.
Yeah, oh, it was horrifying. And I don't know what the greater collective is, if that's a Star Trek term or what, but it was weird to me. And then I started to realize, wow, we need to do something to change that mentality. And so when Brave Books approached me, they're really the new scholastic books for parents who want to have a pro-America book in their library, their family, and their home. I said, I know what I want to do. I know the topic, and I also want to bring a character to the table. I want to bring Chunk, the chubby hamster, to the table, and I want to tell a story that parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles can give their children, saying free speech does matter. And it just clicked. We all got on the phone one day and said, we know what we're going to do. And so Chunk becomes a newspaper publisher in a fictional hamster town called Starlot City on the Freedom Island, which is a whole series of books about Freedom Island. And he can't get his newspaper out because the tubes in the hamster village are clogged by an evil koala bear called Carl. Carl's modeled for adults on Karl Marx, the father of socialism. And the community is endangered because the newspaper can't warn them that there's an impending flood about to happen. And along comes Seymour Clues, the detective dog, and his sidekick, Mr. Mouse. And there's all sorts of great animal characters throughout this book. Penelope P, and other really just fun, memorable characters. And visually beautiful. The Brave Books people just make great images. And they solve the mystery, and the newspaper gets out in time to save the community. And it's really about what happened with Hunter Biden and COVID-19 and all the things that happened. And the tubes are clearly an allegory for adults, for social media and big tech. Karl Marx is the representative of big government working with the tubular people. And I want to give parents a way to tell their children that it's actually harmful to censor people, that free speech matters. It's actually good. And there's even lessons at the end of the book that a parent or grandparent can sit with their child and extend that learning. But even if educators won't teach this going forward, and I think last week you mentioned this on our TV show, the education department said that we have the lowest civics literacy in American history now. Maybe parents, maybe a grandparent, maybe an aunt and an uncle can grab a child in their life and say, listen, I want to pass this on to you because I was taught this. You may not get this. You may not get Schoolhouse Rocks anymore. And do that. And that is really the origins of the book. The folks at Brave Books are amazing. Their illustrations blow me away. They took my idea and boiled it down to a kid in a way that I could never have done. And it's just a great book. And they're doing something very special this month. In the Biden economy, nothing is free. Everything's inflated. But Brave Books is going to give away my book free to you this month if you go sign up at bravebooks.us. And you sign up for their monthly book club, so you keep getting these great patriotic books. I'll give you my book free. And I'm just really grateful. And I'm also grateful that you allow me to talk about this. It's really something I never imagined myself doing in my life, ever.
Well, I wanted to extend Chunk's 15 minutes of fame. I wanted to keep it going. It's important to get him the notoriety instead of you.
You know, it's funny. My wife and son are away again. They're helping a relative out this week. And Chunk was in the cage last night. And I was thinking to myself, you're not getting out, pal. And then I looked at him like, he's a lot fatter than 2 years ago when I lost him. So he's living La Vida Loca, apparently.
Well, but what you bring up is so important. You know, the fact that it's not being taught in schools. So it really does come on to the parents' responsibility to teach these lessons to their children. The idea of a freedom of press, the idea of freedom of speech, the idea of the search for truth. It's something that's severely lacking. Now, this is something that you've been working on throughout your journalistic career. What's going on in journalism school where there is no search for truth? I mean, even if you support and agree with the policies of the person you're covering, you're supposed to be able to put that aside. Are they no longer teaching that aspect in journalism school?
There's a moment where one of my great mentors in my career, I idolized him growing up. I got to work for him at the Washington Post. And now he's an academic at Arizona State University. His name is Len Downey, former executive editor of the Washington Post. He was the city editor in the great movie All the President's Men. He actually edited the stories that Woodward and Bernstein wrote that ultimately brought down the Nixon presidency for its corrupt Watergate scandal. And I learned under him. I relished that he edited me when I was the chief national investigative correspondent for the Washington Post. And he recently said something that just mortified me. And I realized how much my profession has changed. When we got into my profession 35 years ago, 40 years ago, we were taught one thing. There's only 5 things you can accomplish. You can be accurate, You can be precise, means you have accurate facts, and they precisely capture what happened. You can be fair, you can be balanced, and you must be neutral. That's the only thing. And everything else was not really achievable. They used to call it objectivity, but what they really meant was neutrality. You should be picking winners and losers of your stories. Len Downey wrote a piece recently saying that journalism should abandon those standards, the standard of objectivity, neutrality, for achieving some sort of larger moral clarity in the world. That means imposing the journalist's values over a story, allowing your sense of morality to invade the story and maybe make the facts fit that. And if you look at what we've been through the last 6-7 years, reporters have started with a narrative and then try to find facts that will fit with it. That's how we got hoodwinked on Russia collusion. It's how we got hoodwinked on the Hunter Biden laptop. That's how we got hoodwinked on the origins of COVID, or even some of the tactics of the pandemic that the United States government had wrong. There was a narrative and people stuck to it, and they cherry-picked the facts it did, and they ignored everything else. And if they couldn't ignore the other things, they would censor it. They would go to big tech, and even my news media colleagues at publications I worked at and won awards at were trying to censor me a few years ago. We live in one of the most perilous moments in American history, not only because of the challenges abroad and because of the state of our country, economically, security-wise, divisively in politics. We're also at it because the first right that our founding fathers decided to express in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the right of free speech, the First Amendment, and it was first for a very important reason, is under an assault. And if we lose our ability to speak truth to our government, to dissent, we are no longer the American experience of the first 246 years of this great country. And so journalism was always viewed by Ben Franklin, himself a newspaper publisher, as a noble addition to the American constitutional republic. And right now, it poses a threat to that republic by constantly misinforming Americans and then censoring opinions that these new morally ivory-towered, empowered journalists feel is their job to impose on the American people. We need to get back to facts and let Americans make up their own mind. We need to get back to honesty and accuracy. And if we don't, my profession is a large part of the problem of the country going forward.
It really is. And I'm kind of in the same boat because my profession is pretty much the same way, where you have professors that are teaching ideology and public virtue signaling as opposed to giving students facts, but also trying to challenge students in the way of thinking. That no longer exists. And we see this day in, day out. We look at the book you wrote for children. We look at the polls today. I mean, you have over 60% of young adults, those between the ages of 16 to 29, that believe the First Amendment should be amended and we should have charges against what is deemed offensive speech. And then when you push back on my students and ask them, well, what is offensive speech? They can't answer that question. And who gets to determine what's offensive and what's not? And that's my concern. Everything is like feel good. It's all about emotions. We drive arguments through emotion. And you brought up morality. Morality is not like one universal standard. Everyone has a different interpretation of what's moral, what's not, what's right, what's not. But truth is truth. And you can't deny truth. So now we're getting more information regarding Hunter Biden and the Biden family business. And yet I'm looking on Twitter, and just so everyone's aware, like the media world exists on Twitter. Real life does not.
Yes, you're right.
That's one thing I do have to say. But I'm finding it interesting how I'm looking at all these journalists' tweets, particularly from the mainstream media, and they're all saying, well, what Comer released today isn't really implicating Joe Biden himself. Like, yeah, all right, we get it. Hunter Biden, he's a dirtbag, he's a degenerate, crackhead, whatever. But it's not implicating the president. And I'm sitting there. So as a journalist, you look at the mob, something like that, where you have the crime family and then everyone kicks up to the boss. It's not like the boss gets their hands dirty with the day-to-day operations. You got to kick up to the boss. Isn't the Biden family operate under the same conditions, especially if we look at what Comer released today?
Yeah, listen, I think we're getting all the facts we were denied for 4 years, all the facts that we were told were a conspiracy theory, all the facts that we were told were Russian disinformation. They weren't. This is a family, and it was a family business. Politics and making money were the joint family business. They went hand in hand. Policy and making money on foreign countries clearly went hand in hand. And how do we know that? I don't want to make any assessments myself. I'll just quote Hunter Biden himself. And the moment when he was about to be approached with his second big China deal, which would come with a 3-carat diamond and a $5 million no interest forgivable loan from China, from communist China. He wrote one of his business associates in the deal, a guy who shows up a lot in the report today, a guy named Zukovich. He actually meets with Joe Biden's staff at Hunter Biden's request. And he writes him, hey, the Chinese aren't interested in my skills or my services. They're interested in my last name. He knew how he was going to make money by trading on his family's last name. That is Hunter Biden's own words, ingrained in emails that now have been validated to be true. Russia, Ukraine, China, Kazakhstan, Romania, a really extraordinary story today about a Romanian oligarch who is indicted and convicted of corruption, and Hunter Biden's there trying to make money off him with his business partners. That pattern repeats itself throughout the Vice President Joe Biden's tenure. In Ukraine, a corrupt gas company hires a gas company that our State Department deemed corrupt. That's more important. The U.S. called it corrupt. Hunter Biden gets hired to him. A Romanian oligarch who's convicted of corruption. He hires Hunter Biden. A Chinese energy executive who gets gathered up in his own country eventually for corruption. He hires Hunter Biden. A Ukrainian oligarch who was indicted by the United States hires Hunter Biden, or his company does, and there's a large success fee. This pattern of going after people of untoward reputation in foreign countries directly in the responsibility of Joe Biden and making money off of them is very clear now. It's irrefutable.
And do large multinational corporations usually hire people that are addicted to drugs?
They don't. They also don't hire them if they don't have the skill sets aligned with their business, right? Hunter Biden knew nothing about natural gas. He knew nothing about the Romanian country or its business plans. All he knew was that people liked his last name and he could make money off of it. And I think that's what we're getting at. And now there is the next step of the conversation. Hunter Biden clearly was following in the vapor trail of his father, as was his brother, other family members. I think there's 9 of them that are involved in the distribution of money. Now the question is, how much did Joe Biden do to facilitate that? And I'm going to put a little marker on everyone's calendar. It hasn't happened yet, but if it will happen, if business partners like Devon Archer, who, by the way, also was convicted of committing crimes while he was working with Hunter Biden, if he begins to cooperate with Congress, if Eric Schwerin, who worked between Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and even dealt with their tax issues for both of them, begins cooperating, we're going to know 2 questions that right now are still missing from the James Comer narrative. One, did Joe Biden take government actions as promised by his son to benefit the benefactors of the Biden family? Did he trade U.S. policy for money to his family? And then 2, did any of that money directly or indirectly benefit Joe Biden, or was he just content to let his family members cash in on his name, knowing that was his payback to them? The next 3 months and the possibility that these witnesses that were in the inside part of the family operation, if they begin cooperating, I think there's a strong possibility that could happen. We're going to get the final answers to those 2 things. The first answer is answered. Hunter Biden followed in the vapor trail of his father's Air Force Two, and he picked up a lot of money trading off the family name. Now we need to know how many times did Joe Biden assist that operation by aiding his clients, and 2, did any of the money directly or indirectly benefit him? Those are the 3 questions that this influencing pending scandal now has at the top of its list.
That's an important point, and I want to take a quick break. We're going to be right back. When we get back, I want to talk about red flags that were being raised already. It was being raised long ago, as a matter of fact, back in the Obama administration. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Listen up, P.A.S. report audience. Experts say that China is hoarding a massive amount of food. They're soon going to have over 2/3 of the globe's corn reserves, over half its rice reserves, and over half its wheat reserves. But when asked about it, China lies. And one expert says that they, of course, will never admit to doing something like that. Well, what does China know that we don't? When it comes to the global food shortages, China is the canary in the coal mine. And you have to understand, China is the world's #1 food importer. They rely on the rest of the world to keep their people fed, so they can't afford to mess up. There'll be riots, civil panic, or even worse, when over 1 billion people can't eat, it's going to create a crisis for them. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for Americans like me and you? food shortages. That's why it's a smart idea to stock up on a kit of the best-selling 4Patriot survival food. Create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4Patriot survival food kits. It's hand-packed in the United States. The kits are compact, stock easily. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and I can attest to that because I use 4Patriots, and their 5-star reviews on the website rave about the flavor and taste. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase of 4Patriot survival food by typing in the code P.A.S. at checkout. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code P.A.S. to get 10% off your first purchase of 4Patriot survival food. That's 4patriots.com, use code P.A.S. Welcome back, everyone. And now, John, I remember red flags were being raised in the Obama administration. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there were officials within the Obama administration at the State Department and maybe even other agencies that raised red flags about Hunter Biden being on the board of Burisma and his connections within the Ukraine, and then Joe Biden actually being Vice President Biden, being the face of Ukrainian policy. Am I on target there?
They saw it as a conflict of interest, but this is a very important thing, and you are always so prescient. I'm working on something in a couple of weeks that I think is going to knock people's socks off. But during the impeachment of Donald Trump, where Donald Trump tried to get Ukraine to look into these issues, which everybody at the time said there was nothing to look at. No, there was a lot to look at. But during that, they had a very narrow description of what is. The State Department believed that what Hunter Biden did created a conflict of interest, but the officials testified it never affected U.S. policy. And Joe Biden was officially carrying out U.S. policy without his own wishes when he fired the Ukraine prosecutor who just happened to be investigating his son's Burisma company. I can tell you now, because I've made this one public already, there was a classified email at the State Department that I now possess and have made public, so it's not classified anymore. It's in the public domain, where the State Department's top a career official in Ukraine reported to the U.S. ambassador in Ukraine at the end of the Obama presidency, somebody should tell Joe Biden his son, Hunter, undercut U.S. anti-corruption policy in Ukraine. That is the message in this once classified email. That now contradicts the testimony, but it makes more sense to American people that, of course, if he created a conflict of interest, of course he undercut U.S. policy. The second is, was Joe Biden really carrying out U.S. policy? And State Department officials gave very, very specific testimony, like literally on this date, on that day, the career bureaucracy of the government recommended that the prosecutor be fired and the $1 billion in loan guarantees be deprived unless the prosecutor investigating Hunter Biden was fired. That's been, and it's a very specific amount, days, times, who's involved, the name of the task force. I can tell you that through the Freedom of Information Act and through sources, have new documents, which I'll make public in a couple of weeks, that will directly contradict, conflict, challenge that part of the testimony. And if those two parts of the Ukraine impeachment story were wrong, the entire narrative that Americans got in 2019 turns out to be a false narrative, like Russia collusion, like the Hunter Biden laptop. So stay tuned on that. But that is what we were originally told in 2019. Most of it doesn't add up today.
Yeah, in the mainstream media, they continue to push out there, well, Europe wanted the prosecutor fired, Obama wanted the prosecutor fired, and yada, yada, yada. Yet you can't find a European quote from a European official stating that the prosecutor should be fired. But, you know, when we look at the finances, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe it has been confirmed that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden actually shared a joint bank account, that they did have a bank account together, correct?
They didn't have a joint bank account. What we do know is that, and this is from the laptop, from confirmed emails, that Joe Biden owed Hunter Biden money when he was vice president, and he signed over one of his Delaware tax refunds to repay some of the money he owed his son. So that means son Hunter was giving money to father Vice President Joe Biden. That is now captured in written email. The second thing we know is that Hunter Biden, in a series of emails with the guy that worked between him and Joe Biden, he handled kind of their personal finances in some way for both, a guy named Eric Schwerin, one of those guys I say keep an eye out, he might begin cooperating. He writes and identifies bills that Hunter Biden was paying out of his foreign business dealings for his father, things like cell phones, things like house repairs. So there is some evidence that the Biden finances, Hunter and Joe's, were commingled. There's not a bank account that we know of yet that had both their names on it, but there are clear statements a contemporaneous document showing that the two traded money, that the father felt he owed the son money, that the son paid some of his father's bills. That is definitely been confirmed. Now, how far reaching that is, we don't know. I think a lot of people think, well, maybe James Comer one day will find a bank account and that's where all the secret money went. I don't think we're going to be finding that bank account, but we don't need that to repudiate the corrupt behavior that is now sitting in front of us.
No, we don't. And one of the things when we do look at that money transfer, and people will say, well, did President Biden know where that money was coming from? At the same time, President Biden stated that he never got involved in Hunter's business dealings. So we know that was a lie. But when you look at what Comer released today, you see all these shell corporations that money was transferring hands from. If you're operating in a normal business, the money should flow from Corporation A to Corporation B. It shouldn't go to A, B, C, D, E, and then into Biden's bank account, whether it's Hunter. But one of the things, so suspicious activity reports, I mean, they're generated whenever something comes up. There's tons of suspicious activity reports on Hunter Biden. And this is where I think there may be a bigger story that I don't hear anyone really talking about it. Given everything going on, you have our intelligence community and our law enforcement community. I'm talking about the intel chiefs and the law enforcement chiefs. The Biden family itself is like a foreign intelligence agency's dream, given everything that Hunter Biden was doing and what they could blackmail or coerce him about.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that given all these suspicious activity reports that Comer's pointing out, and given what we know, that the Biden family name crossed over the desks of senior intel officials, senior law enforcement officials several times. So doesn't that raise the question, what did all these heads know and when did they know it and why did they keep it so quiet? I mean, here we are. And in cases, we're over a decade in some of the instances that this took place, and yet we're just finding out about it now. Some of it we found out a couple of years ago, but a lot of this information we're just finding out now. The question is, were these top officials, were they sweeping it under the rug? What was going on?
Most of the congressional members who are most briefed on the evidence that's not yet public say that they see a 7 to 8 year protection racket, that a political protection racket that kept protecting the Biden family from scrutiny that any other American under similar circumstances almost certainly would have had to endure. The first suspicious bank activity reports are filed by Morgan Stanley Bank in the spring of 2015, and they lay out a series of transactions that raise concerns about money laundering and other issues, tax issues and things. A year later, in between that time, those bank transactions trigger the indictment of one of Hunter Biden's closest business associates for a business activity that occurred in a company that Hunter Biden and Devon Archer ran together. But Hunter Biden doesn't get charged. He doesn't get mentioned in the trial. That occurs in the spring of 2016. In the fall of 2016, a private banker, a top bank official in one of the big banks that were filing the suspicious activity reports, he files a detailed whistleblower complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission saying there's a lot of behavior here, and he lists a whole bunch of entities that clearly involve Hunter Biden, Devon Archer, many other the business characters. That's been pending for now 7 years. Just think about that. In 2017, Hunter Biden's right-hand businessman, the guy I told you about, Eric Schwerin, keep an eye on him, see if he starts cooperating. He writes Hunter Biden saying, hey, Hunter, it's 2017. You didn't pay taxes on you did not declare income or pay taxes on $400,000 that you got from that allegedly corrupt Ukrainian gas company called Burisma. So that's been sitting out there since 2017. In 2018, the Ukraine Attorney General hired the former U.S. Attorney in Little Rock to approach the Justice Department and say, I have evidence that Joe Biden was involved in a pay-to-play scheme in Ukraine, and he could bring 2 John Doe witnesses to America to provide evidence and do that. And the U.S. Attorney, the Justice Department declines to act on it. They just pass on it. In 2019, the FBI gets the laptop. And in 2019, the FBI worked with a former Ukrainian government official who also alleged that there was pay-to-play going on in the Biden world. In June 2020, a confidential human source registered with the FBI, someone the FBI vetted and trusted to be a confidential human source, provides a detailed account and evidence that Joe Biden was involved in a pay-to-play bribery scheme involving trading U.S. policy for money to his family. All of those waves occurred. That's 7 waves over a 5-year period, and not a single thing happened. There wasn't an indictment. There wasn't an arrest. There wasn't. And when Ron Johnson and Chuck Grassley started to ask questions, the FBI and the intelligence community called those questions conspiracy theories or Russian disinformation. When the laptop came out, 51 people who derived their credibility as intelligence experts as from the United States taxpayers. They were our CIA directors, our deputy CIA directors, our top.
Many of those who were actually employed by the Obama administration.
They were.
And have been in the national security framework for a long time. They
got their bona fides from us, the American people. They lied to the American people. U.S. spies lied to the American people and called the Hunter Biden laptop Russian disinformation without a single shred of evidence and significant contradictory evidence, i.e., the FBI already had the laptop for months. So that is that protection racket that a lot of the congressional members see in this body of evidence in that timeline that I just gave you.
And so I think there's really two stories. So you have the Biden family business, which is a national security issue and a corruption issue. But then you also have the bureaucracy, where we see the protection of the Biden family. We saw the Russian collusion scam go on, where you were raked over the coals for your reporting, and it turned out everything you reported was 100% spot on. We then see the same people involved in the whole censoring of the laptop. It really is astonishing how deep it goes, because those same people involved in the laptop, or the same community, the national security ones, were also the ones working with big tech to say that things should be censored. Yeah. So as far as exposing all this, people know, but why does probably half, or maybe even a little bit more than half the country, not see this as the biggest threat? I mean, it almost goes right back to your book, the children's book, with hidden headlines, where people just say, yeah, well, we know he's doing something wrong, and we know that certain things aren't right, but it's not that big of a deal. I mean, I look at the corruption within the bureaucracy, the political corruption, as the biggest threat to the republic.
It is, and our founding fathers always thought it to be a corrupt central government would be the worst nightmare for our founding fathers. In Watergate, we repudiated it. In the China money scandal, the Clinton years, we repudiated corrupt behavior. Today, official Washington, the FBI, the intelligence community, the media establishment, big tech, all are refusing to repudiate it. And that's what makes what you and I do as new entrants into the media market. We're getting the truth of the American people around a blockade of censors and misinformers in the country. Now, I'll just give you hit on something I think is so important. I just want to tell you something about Mike Morrell. Mike Morrell is the organizer of the 2020 Hunter Biden laptop letter, the false letter. That wasn't the first time he, as a senior intelligence official, intervened in an election. In 2016, if people do their homework or just read Just the News, either one will get you there quickly. He was the first intelligence official to suggest that Donald Trump was a recruited Russian asset of Vladimir Putin. There was not a shred of evidence to substantiate that. And oh, by the way, right after he made that claim, he endorsed Hillary Clinton. And then a funny thing happened. A letter with 50 intelligence experts raised similar concerns. So the 2020 playbook was actually born in 2016. But now I'm going to take you back to when Mike Morrell was at the end of his CIA career, but he was actually still in the CIA as its deputy director. In the 2012 election, where Barack Obama was running for re-election, Mike Morrell admitted he was the man to edit the talking points of the national security advisor at the time, to take out the fact that the Benghazi attack was actually a terrorist attack carried out by an al-Qaeda wing, and therefore leave the talking points to create a false perception that the attack on Benghazi was actually the result of anger over an anti-Muslim video making its way through Europe. That was not and was never true. And he admitted he did that. So in 3 consecutive elections, 2012, 2016, 2020, Mike Morrell took actions under the color of a current or former intelligence leader of this country to influence or have impact on the American elections. We talk about Russia and Iran and North Korea and China, the threat of them intervening, and it's a real threat. But the truth of the matter is, the single greatest example of spies in this world intervening in the U.S. election were American spies, the 2016 spies that created the fake Russia collusion story, and the 2020 spies who falsely portrayed the Hunter Biden laptop as Russian disinformation, and therefore deprived the American public of making an informed election choice.
And last question, do you think that as more and more people are aware of what's going on, do you think it's going to be more difficult for them to try and manipulate 2024? Or do you think that they're going to try the similar type playbook?
Question. Well, one thing will be sure, Joe Biden won't be able to take advantage of a pandemic like he did in 2020, and the Democratic machinery won't. And two, he will no longer be able to credibly look into the camera and say, there's no there about my son. His son likely will be indicted if his legal defense team is reading the tea leaves correctly. All these documents are out here now. The three primary statements that Joe Biden made to the American people: my family never got any money from China. Wrong. James Comer pierced that today. I never did anything to help my son's business associates. Wrong. He met with one of those business people, and he met with a lot of them, actually. And the third one is there's nothing corrupt in what my son did. Well, if the FBI and Justice Department indict him, that will soon be wrong as well. That was now going to be on the resume of Joe Biden. He lied to the American people, and other people around him helped sustain the lie with things like the letter from the 51. I think that's the moment we're in history. Americans will be certain of that. Is it easy to create another false reality for another election? Sure, particularly with the rise of AI. That really scares me. These are old-fashioned human tricks. AI could be a lot more sophisticated.
It certainly can. And, this is purely speculation on my part, but if I start seeing anonymous leaks out of the Department of Justice and the CIA and FBI, it tells me that Joe Biden served his purpose. They now view him as a liability, and they're trying to get him out of the race. Resign, pardon him and his son, and then he goes off into the sunset. I wouldn't be surprised. But, John, I really appreciate you taking the time. Everyone's got to check out Get It for Your Children, Hidden Headlines, The Seymour Clues Mystery. Check it out. It's phenomenal. John, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. I really enjoy your show. I listen to it all the time.
John is a phenomenal journalist. Love having him on. And at least there's still some people like him, journalists that actually care about the truth. Not for nothing, but what he said is so critically important. If children in school aren't getting taught the lessons about America, American values, the importance of the fundamental principles like liberty, it is incumbent on the parents. It's incumbent on the family members to step in and fill that void. We have to do it. Everyone needs to follow Just the News and John Solomon. Watch Just the News, Not Noise with John Solomon and Amanda Head on Real America's Voice, and get John's new book, Hidden Headlines. Read it with your children. I have all the links up at the P.A.S. Report website, PASreport.com, so check it out. As always, please share this episode with family and friends and on social media. If you find the podcast informative, please take 30 seconds, write the P.A.S. Report podcast a review on any podcast platform that allows it, and leave a 5-star rating. I want to thank you for joining me. I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.